Sarah Martinez never imagined that her peaceful morning coffee would be the last normal moment of her life for months to come. As a medical volunteer with an international aid organization, she had arrived in the remote mountain village of Kalesh just 3 weeks earlier. The village sat nestled between two warring territories, and while tensions existed, the ceasefire had held for over a year. Sarah felt relatively safe as she worked alongside Dr. Hassan, treating villagers who had limited access to medical care. The morning started like any other. Sarah woke up in the small clinic building where she and 2 other volunteers lived. The sun was just beginning to peek over the mountains, casting long shadows across the dusty streets. She could hear children playing outside and women chatting as they carried water from the well. Everything seemed peaceful and routine. Dr. Hassan arrived at the clinic around 8 o'clock, carrying his usual thermos of strong black tea. He was a kind man in his 50s who had dedicated his life to helping the people of this region. Sarah had learned so much from him during her short time there. They began their morning routine of checking on patients who had stayed overnight at the small clinic. Around 10 o'clock, they heard the distant rumble of vehicles approaching. This was unusual because supply trucks typically arrived on Thursdays, and it was only Tuesday. Dr. Hassan looked concerned as he peered out the window. What they saw made their blood run cold. A convoy of military trucks was racing toward the village, kicking up clouds of dust behind them. The vehicles bore the markings of the northern faction, one of the groups involved in the ongoing conflict. According to the ceasefire agreement, neither side was supposed to enter this neutral zone. Dr. Hassan quickly ushered Sarah toward the back of the clinic while he went to speak with the soldiers. He told her to stay hidden no matter what happened. Sarah crouched behind a stack of medical supplies, her heart pounding so loud she was sure everyone could hear it. Through the thin walls, she could hear shouting in a language she didn't understand. Dr. Hassan's voice became increasingly urgent as he tried to reason with the soldiers. The sound of boots stomping through the clinic made her stomach twist with fear. Suddenly, gunshots erupted throughout the village. Sarah pressed her hands over her mouth to stifle a scream. The shooting seemed to come from everywhere at once. She could hear people screaming and running in panic. The peaceful village she had come to love was being torn apart in a matter of minutes. The clinic door burst open, and Sarah heard Dr. Hassan cry out in pain. Heavy footsteps moved through the building as soldiers searched every room. Sarah squeezed herself deeper behind the supplies, praying they wouldn't find her. She heard them speaking rapidly in their language, searching for something or someone. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, the sounds began to fade. The vehicles started up again, and Sarah could hear them driving away from the village. She waited another hour before daring to move from her hiding spot. When she finally emerged, the sight that greeted her was devastating. Dr. Hassan lay unconscious on the clinic floor, blood seeping from a head wound. The other 2 volunteers were nowhere to be found. Sarah quickly checked Dr. Hassan's pulse and was relieved to find it was steady. She carefully cleaned his wound and bandaged it, using the skills he had taught her. As she worked, she noticed that many of the medical supplies had been ransacked. When Dr. Hassan regained consciousness several hours later, his first words were a warning. The soldiers had been looking for Sarah specifically. Someone had told them that an American medical worker was in the village, and they planned to take her as a prisoner. The other volunteers had been captured, but Sarah's hiding spot had saved her life. Dr. Hassan explained that the situation had changed dramatically. The ceasefire was over, and this region was now an active war zone. The northern faction controlled this area, and they were known for taking foreign aid workers hostage. Sarah's organization would assume she was either dead or captured. No rescue mission would come to this remote location. As night fell, Dr. Hassan made a difficult decision. Sarah couldn't stay in the village because the soldiers would return. She also couldn't contact her organization because all communication equipment had been destroyed. Her only option was to try to reach the southern border, which was controlled by government forces friendly to international aid workers. The journey would be incredibly dangerous. Sarah would have to travel alone through mountainous terrain filled with enemy patrols. Dr. Hassan drew her a rough map on a piece of paper, showing hidden paths that local smugglers used to move between territories. He gave her his own backpack filled with medical supplies, dried food, and a water purification tablets. Sarah spent her last night in the village helping Dr. Hassan treat wounded villagers. Many people had been hurt during the attack, and the clinic was the only source of medical care for miles. As she worked, Sarah realized how much she had grown during her time there. She was no longer the nervous volunteer who had arrived 3 weeks earlier. She had become someone who could make life-or-death decisions under pressure. Before dawn, Dr. Hassan walked Sarah to the edge of the village. He pointed toward a narrow mountain path that would take her away from the main roads where patrols were likely to be found. His eyes were filled with worry as he hugged her goodbye. He made her promise to be careful and to trust no one except government forces. Sarah began her journey as the sun rose behind her. Each step took her further from the life she had known and deeper into unknown danger. She had no idea that her disappearance had already been reported, or that somewhere in a military command center plans were being made to find her. Her real adventure was just beginning. The mountain path was steep and rocky, forcing Sarah to move slowly to avoid making noise. Every sound in the forest made her freeze with fear. She didn't know if the soldiers who were hunting her were still in the area or if there were other dangers she hadn't considered. All she could do was keep moving forward and hope that somehow she would find her way to safety. As the morning progressed, Sarah realized that surviving behind enemy lines would require every ounce of courage and intelligence she possessed. She was completely alone in hostile territory, with no way to communicate with the outside world. Her fate now depended entirely on her own abilities and the kindness of strangers she might encounter along the way. 3 days into her journey through the mountains, Sarah had learned to move like a ghost. Every muscle in her body ached from sleeping on hard ground and climbing treacherous paths, but she had developed an instinct for danger that kept her alive. She traveled only at dawn and dusk, hiding during the bright daylight hours when enemy patrols might spot her from a distance. On the 4th morning, Sarah's water supply ran dangerously low. The purification tablets Dr. Hassan had given her were running out, and she hadn't found a clean water source since leaving the village. Her lips were cracked and her tongue felt like sandpaper. She knew that without water, she wouldn't survive another day in the harsh mountain environment. Following the sound of running water, Sarah discovered a small stream hidden deep in a valley. As she knelt to fill her water bottles, she heard voices approaching from upstream. Her blood turned to ice as she recognized the harsh accent of Northern faction soldiers. They were close enough that she could hear individual words, though she couldn't understand their meaning. Sarah quickly filled one bottle and crawled behind a large boulder, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through gaps in the rock, she watched as 5 soldiers appeared along the stream bank. They were heavily armed and moved with the confidence of men who controlled this territory. One of them carried a radio, and she could hear crackling voices speaking through the static. The soldiers stopped directly across from her hiding place to rest and refill their own water supplies. Sarah pressed herself against the cold stone, barely daring to breathe. One of the men lit a cigarette, and the smell of tobacco smoke drifted across the water. They seemed to be in no hurry to move on. After 20 terrifying minutes, the soldiers finally continued upstream, their voices gradually fading into the distance. Sarah waited another hour before moving from her hiding spot. The encounter had shaken her badly, but it also taught her something important. The enemy was actively patrolling these mountains, which meant they might still be searching for her specifically. That evening, Sarah found shelter in a small cave hidden behind a waterfall. The cave was dry and concealed from view, making it a perfect place to rest and plan her next move. As she ate a small portion of her remaining dried food, she studied the map Dr. Hassan had drawn for her. According to his markings, she was still at least 5 days away from the border. The next morning brought new challenges. Heavy rain had made the mountain paths slippery and dangerous. Sarah's worn hiking boots struggled to find grip on the wet rocks, and several times she nearly fell into deep ravines. The rain also limited her visibility, making it harder to spot potential threats until they were very close. Around midday, the rain stopped, but Sarah's problems were far from over. As she climbed over a ridge, she spotted a military checkpoint blocking the main mountain pass ahead. 2 armored vehicles sat across the narrow road, and soldiers were checking anyone who tried to pass through. Sarah realized that her original route was no longer an option. Consulting her map again, Sarah found an alternative path that would take her through much more difficult terrain. This route would add at least 3 days to her journey, but it was the only way to avoid the checkpoint. She began the detour, knowing that her food supplies wouldn't last much longer. The alternative path led through dense forest, where the canopy blocked out most of the sunlight. Sarah found herself stumbling over hidden roots and pushing through thorny underbrush that tore at her clothes and skin. Strange animal sounds echoed through the trees, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. On her 7th day in the mountains, Sarah's luck finally ran out. While crossing a steep hillside, loose rocks gave way under her feet, and she tumbled down a rocky slope. She managed to stop herself before falling over a cliff, but her left ankle was badly twisted, and her backpack had torn open, scattering some of her precious supplies. Sitting on the mountainside with her injured ankle throbbing, Sarah felt despair wash over her. She was lost, hurt, and running out of food and water. No one knew where she was or even if she was still alive. For the first time since escaping the village, she wondered if she would ever see home again. But Sarah refused to give up. Using her medical training, she carefully examined her ankle and determined that it was sprained but not broken. She tore strips from her spare shirt to create a makeshift bandage and used a fallen branch as a walking stick. Moving would be slower and more painful, but she could still continue her journey. That night, while hiding in another cave, Sarah heard helicopters in the distance. The sound filled her with both hope and terror. Were they searching for her as part of a rescue mission, or were they enemy aircraft looking to capture her? In the darkness, she couldn't see any identifying markings, so she decided to stay hidden rather than risk exposing herself. The helicopters circled the area for over an hour before flying away toward the south. Sarah spent the rest of the night wondering if she had just missed her only chance at rescue. The uncertainty was almost worse than the physical pain and exhaustion she felt. Over the next 2 days, Sarah pushed herself harder than ever before. Her injured ankle slowed her progress, but her determination grew stronger with each mile. She began to recognize landmarks from Dr. Hassan's map, which meant she was getting closer to the border. The thought of reaching safety gave her the strength to keep going despite her deteriorating physical condition. On the 10th day, Sarah encountered another person for the first time since leaving the village. An elderly shepherd was leading his goats along a high mountain path when he spotted her. The man's weathered face showed concern when he saw her condition. Though they couldn't communicate directly, his kind gestures made it clear he wanted to help. The shepherd shared his simple meal of bread and goat cheese with Sarah, the first real food she had eaten in days. He also pointed toward the southern mountains and spoke words she didn't understand, but his tone suggested he was giving her directions. Before parting ways, he gave her a warm wool blanket that would prove invaluable during the cold mountain nights. As Sarah continued her journey, she began to notice changes in the landscape that suggested she was approaching a different territory. The mountains were lower, and she occasionally spotted roads and buildings in the valleys below. According to her map, she was finally approaching the border region where government forces maintained control. But reaching the border would bring its own dangers. Sarah knew that government soldiers might be suspicious of anyone crossing from enemy territory. She would need to approach them carefully and hope that her identification as an aid worker would protect her rather than make her a target. The night before what she hoped would be her final day in the mountains, Sarah allowed herself to imagine returning home. She thought about hot showers, comfortable beds, and meals that didn't come from a backpack. But most of all, she thought about telling Dr. Hassan that she had made it to safety, though she had no idea if he was still alive. Unknown to Sarah, her journey through the mountains had not gone completely unnoticed. Advanced surveillance equipment had detected her movement patterns, and skilled analysts were working to determine her exact location. Her rescue was closer than she could possibly imagine. Captain Jake Morrison had been studying satellite images for 3 weeks, searching for any trace of the missing aid worker. The intelligence briefing had been clear but frustrating. Sarah Martinez had disappeared during an attack on a remote village, and standard search protocols had found no evidence of her fate. Most analysts assumed she was either dead or being held prisoner in an undisclosed location. But Morrison's team specialized in finding people who didn't want to be found. They had tracked down kidnapped diplomats, rescued downed pilots, and extracted civilians from war zones across the globe. Morrison had a reputation for never giving up on a mission, and something about the satellite data suggested that Sarah Martinez might still be alive and moving. The breakthrough came when Sergeant Lisa Chen, the team's intelligence specialist, noticed an unusual pattern in thermal imaging data. Over the past 10 days, heat signatures consistent with a single person had been detected moving south through mountainous terrain. The movement pattern was careful and deliberate, suggesting someone trying to avoid detection rather than random wandering. Morrison assembled his 4-person team within hours of Chen's discovery. Besides Chen, the team included Corporal Mike Rodriguez, an expert tracker and survival specialist, and Private First Class David Kim, a medic and communications expert. All 4 had extensive experience in hostile territory rescue operations. Their mission briefing revealed the challenges they would face. The target was moving through an area controlled by Northern faction forces who were actively searching for the same person. The terrain was mountainous and difficult, with limited landing zones for helicopter extraction. Most importantly, they had to find Sarah before enemy forces captured her or before the harsh environment claimed her life. Using advanced computer modeling, Chen calculated the most likely route Sarah would take toward the government-controlled border. The analysis suggested she was following traditional smuggling paths that avoided major roads and checkpoints. This information allowed Morrison to predict where his team might intercept her. The team inserted into the mountains just before dawn, using a specialized helicopter that could operate in the thin mountain air. The pilot dropped them at a location several miles ahead of Sarah's projected path, giving them time to establish surveillance positions and plan their approach. Rodriguez immediately began searching for tracks and other signs of passage. His years of experience in wilderness tracking had made him legendary within Special Forces circles. Within 2 hours, he found evidence that someone had recently passed through the area. Broken branches, disturbed soil, and a few drops of blood on rocks told a story of someone injured but still moving. The team followed the trail carefully, maintaining radio silence to avoid detection by enemy forces. Morrison knew that Northern faction units were also in the area, and a confrontation could jeopardize the entire rescue mission. Their goal was to locate Sarah quietly and extract her without anyone knowing they had been there. On their second day in the mountains, Kim's radio equipment picked up enemy communications suggesting that Northern faction forces were closing in on their target. The intercepted messages indicated they had found the stream where Sarah had hidden from the patrol and were following her trail. Morrison realized they were now in a race against time. The team increased their pace, using their superior equipment and training to move faster through the difficult terrain. Morrison made the difficult decision to split up, with Rodriguez continuing to follow Sarah's trail while the others established an ambush position in case enemy forces arrived first. Chen's analysis proved accurate when Rodriguez spotted Sarah late in the afternoon of their second day. She was moving slowly down a rocky slope, clearly exhausted and favoring one leg. Through binoculars, Rodriguez could see that she was in bad shape, but still alert and cautious. He immediately radioed her position to Morrison. Morrison faced a delicate situation. Sarah had been alone in hostile territory for almost 2 weeks and would be extremely wary of strangers. Approaching her incorrectly could cause her to run or hide, potentially into the arms of enemy forces. He decided that Kim, as the team medic, would make the initial contact while the others provided security. Kim approached Sarah's position carefully, making sure she could see him coming from a distance. He wore standard military fatigues, but carried his hands visible and spoke in clear English as he got closer. When Sarah finally spotted him, her reaction was exactly what Morrison had expected. She immediately looked for escape routes and seemed ready to run despite her obvious exhaustion. Kim stopped at a safe distance and called out his name and unit, explaining that he was part of a rescue mission sent to find her. Sarah's response was a mixture of relief, disbelief, and suspicion. She had been betrayed once and wasn't ready to trust anyone completely. Kim patiently answered her questions about how they had found her and provided details that proved his legitimacy. The reunion was interrupted by Rodriguez's urgent radio call. Enemy vehicles were approaching on a road less than a mile away, and the team had perhaps 20 minutes before Northern faction soldiers would be searching this exact area. Morrison ordered an immediate extraction to the predetermined pickup zone. Sarah's injured ankle made rapid movement difficult, but she pushed herself beyond her limits when she understood the urgency of the situation. Rodriguez and Kim took turns supporting her weight as they climbed toward higher ground where the extraction helicopter could safely land. With 10 minutes to spare, Morrison's team reached the pickup zone just as their helicopter appeared over the ridge. The pilot had been monitoring enemy radio traffic and confirmed that Northern faction forces were spreading out to search the lower elevations. The timing of the extraction was perfect. As Sarah was helped aboard the helicopter, she looked back at the mountains where she had survived for nearly 2 weeks alone. The experience had changed her in ways she was only beginning to understand. She had discovered reserves of strength and determination she never knew she possessed. During the flight to safety, Kim checked Sarah's injuries and provided initial medical treatment. Her ankle was badly sprained and she was dehydrated and exhausted, but she would make a full recovery. More importantly, her psychological condition seemed stable despite the trauma she had endured. Morrison's after-action report praised Sarah's survival skills and decision-making. Her choice to avoid main roads and travel during limited hours had made his team's job much easier. Her movements had been predictable enough for professionals to track, but random enough to confuse enemy forces searching for her. The successful mission became a case study in Special Forces training programs. Sarah's survival story demonstrated the importance of basic wilderness skills and calm decision-making under pressure. Morrison's tracking and extraction techniques were analyzed and incorporated into rescue protocols. 3 months later, Sarah returned to work with a different aid organization, this time in a safer location. But she carried with her the knowledge that she could survive anything and that somewhere in the world there were people trained to find her if she ever needed help again. Dr. Hassan, who had recovered from his injuries, received word that Sarah had reached safety. He smiled as he continued his work in the rebuilt clinic, knowing that the young woman he had helped save was now helping others somewhere else in the world. Morrison's team was already preparing for their next mission, but they kept in touch with Sarah through occasional messages. The bond formed during those dangerous days in the mountains was something that would last for the rest of their lives. They had proven once again that no one would be left behind, no matter how difficult the rescue might be.